Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is episode 21 of Stewarts Soundbites. The weeks are flying by, even though it feels like the longest period of time ever. We've all been working at home. The weeks are flying. Today, we've got a really exciting session for you lined up. We're joined today by Rachel Burley-Stower, who is a care law solicitor, a community care law solicitor at Martin Searle Solicitors. And today, we thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about continuing healthcare. It's something that's so important in a lot of the cases that we deal with. Lots of the clients that we deal with are impacted, and it's important for us to understand the different types of funding and public funding that's available. So thank you so much for being with us, Rachel.
Pleasure.
We really appreciate it. And I thought, because we have so little time, I'm just going to dive in and ask you a little bit, just, I suppose, generally just as an introduction, to tell us a little bit more about continuing healthcare, what it is, who does it apply to, and why is it so important?
Okay, so NHS Continuing Healthcare is non-means tested funding. In other words, it's funding for care by the NHS with no reference to a person's capital or their income. Okay, which is really important for our group of clients, especially those who have had personal injury settlements a long time ago, and they were very much dependent on interest rates that were going to be paid by the banks, which are no longer being paid. Okay, it's also very important to those who have had personal injury settlements and, for example, they've had a reduction for contributory negligence.
Yeah.
So, for example, you have a client who's had a road traffic accident, but they wasn't wearing their seatbelt. And they've had their settlement, but there has been a reduction by 25%. Now, that client still has 24-hour care needs, which is 168 hours per week. Okay, so if you're paying £10 a week for that, £10 an hour for care, that's £1,680 a week. Okay, now if they're having to pay 25% of that out of their own pocket because of the reduction in their settlement, they're paying £420 a week, which is over £20,000 a year out of their own pockets. Yeah. So you will appreciate that as time goes by, they're going to be eating into their capital and they won't actually be able to fund their long-term care needs. Because there's that group of people. Of course, there's also a group of people who just didn't get very good settlements, and they were just clearly that amount of money, the money they got was never going to see them through. So there's a whole group of people actually who are really quite dependent on NHS CHC. It's like contrary to popular belief that, you know, a personal injury settlement is like winning the lottery. Of course, we know that is not the case. And, you know, that all the personal injury settlement is meant to do is put people back into the position they would have been but for the accident. Yeah. So you have very ordinary people who have now got severe disabilities and huge funding costs.
Yeah.
And so the NHS CHC is really a good way of plugging that gap.
Yeah.
Funny enough, though, NHS CHC, it's actually, in order to be eligible for NHS CHC, you have to show that you have a primary healthcare need. Okay? All those groups of people we just spoke about will just have to demonstrate that they have a primary healthcare need. Now, that also applies to your granny, your granddad, your mum, your dad, anybody who might end up going into residential care home. It's exactly the same rules for everybody. So whatever I talk about today, all the rules that I speak about will also apply to your elderly grandparents going into residential care because they've got dementia, or your 19-year-old man who's was involved in a road traffic accident and requires care at home. The rules apply in exactly the same way. So it's worth listening for, both work reasons and personal reasons, because the rules apply in exactly the same way.
Yeah. I think that it's something that perhaps is so prevalent in these types of cases that we deal with, and it comes up all the time, and there's always discussion about CHC funding, but actually it's not. There's a basic understanding, but sometimes that kind of deeper understanding is missing. And there are a lot of misconceptions around continuing healthcare as well. Can you tell us, are there any misconceptions, any common misconceptions that you can dispel for us?
Yeah, there's actually lots. Yes, a common one would be that a person can only get NHS CHC if they was in residential care. This is absolutely wrong. People can have NHS CHC at home. Another one would be that if you had NHS CHC at home, you would have to have care provided by the CCG. Like the CCG would have a bank of carers and they would send those carers to your house. That's incorrect. You can actually apply for a personal health budget. So the CCG would assess you, find you had a primary healthcare need and calculate the number of hours care that you require, and then put a financial figure on the hours. And then they would give you that monthly so that you can employ your own care team. So very often I have clients who've got a care team in place already. We apply for NHS CHC and basically the CCG send the money so they can pay their current care team.
Right, okay.
Another misconception would be that if you had a care package at home, the CCG would only fund a very minimum care package, so maybe 3 visits a day or what have you. Again, that's wrong. If you have a primary healthcare need, the CCG automatically have a duty to meet your health and social care needs. And therefore, whatever your needs are, they have to meet them. If you have a 24/7, 2-to-1 care needs, that's what the CCG would have to fund. Okay. How I'm not saying it would be easy. I mean, you often have to have a fight to get the CCG to fund all of your needs. That is their duty, and that's what we do. We do get, we push up care packages for people.
Right. Okay. And we have touched on the types of people that are eligible for CHC funding, and I wonder whether you would just expand on that a little bit, because I think you said, it applies to everyone we're talking about today. It applies to everybody. It talks about your granny in the care home and all sorts of different peoples, but maybe you could give us a bit more insight into kind of the eligibility criteria specifically.
Yeah, sure. And so, as I said, in order to qualify for NHS CHC, you have to have what they call a primary healthcare need. Okay, unfortunately, there isn't actually a legal definition of primary healthcare need,
which is helpful.
And so where it stems from, it actually stems from the interaction between the NHS Act 1946 and the National Assistance Act, 1948, and the interaction between them. This was questioned in a case which is commonly quoted, the Coughlin case. Okay, and from that Coughlin case came a test. Okay, I'm not going to focus too much on that today because that's going down an academic route, which I find interesting. It's probably not helpful. But because of that case, the NHS devised a test. And it's that test which they now use in order to decide whether someone has a primary healthcare need or not. Okay, so what they do, they use a form called the NHS CHC Decision Support Tool. And it's about a 35-page document. Okay, so if you can scroll through down to about page 21 before it gets interesting. Okay, and that's really where the test starts. Okay, now what they do is they've got 12 care domains. Okay, and then that list of 12 care domains, each domain is assigned a score. Okay, and the score is between a priority and a no need. Okay, and so the higher the scores that you get, the more likely you are to qualify for NHS CHC. So if you have a priority, you're more or less home and dry. Okay, you're more likely to be found absolutely, definitely eligible. If you have a severe and a number of highs or 2 severes, you're most likely to be found eligible. Okay, or as you can tell, the lower the scores, the less likely you are to be found with a primary healthcare need. But that's not to say that you definitely can't qualify, because if your needs are either intense, complex, or unpredictable, then you also should qualify. but that is slightly going down the academic path, and so I'm going to avoid that. But it's just something to bear in mind in the future if you're ever thinking about it. If someone has these low scores, think to yourself, well, are those needs intense, complex, or unpredictable? And just have another look at it. Okay, so for example, we'll take one of the care needs, for instance, continence. Yeah. Okay, so if somebody has continence needs, there's the domain continence, and there's 4 scores: no need, low, moderate, and high. They haven't got a severe and a priority in that one. If your person has no continence needs, and obviously they've got a tick in the no needs box. If they have needs which can be met by regular toileting, for example, then they'll have a low score. If they're doubly incontinent, but those needs are met just by the changing of pads, they'll get a moderate score. If they are doubly incontinent and they have the need for, say, manual evacuations, constipations, regular UTIs, then they will get a high score.
Okay.
And so each of these domains, as I say, is broken down into scores, and there's a descriptor against each score. And so what the CCG, along with somebody from social services, because it has to be an MDT who does the assessment, they go through each care domain and they look at the individual, and they give them the score that applies. And at the end, they calculate the scores. And if you score high enough, then you will be found to have a primary healthcare need. And this is a very rough example of how it works. It's much, it's not generally that smooth. There's a lot of argy-bargy over the domains and what have you, but just to give people a rough idea about the process.
Yeah,
that's how it would work.
That's really helpful from a practical point of view, though, Rachel. And I was going to ask you a bit about the procedure for applying, but you've touched on that already. But I was wondering whether there were any kind of, we love tips on Soundbites. We love to give out some practical tips. So I was wondering if you have any tips for people who are applying for CHC, for, you know, to help kind of secure that funding.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, this is really important, in fact. The first thing you would do is apply to the GP or the social worker to complete what they call a checklist. And that would be sent to the CCG, and the CCG would then have a duty to complete the DST, which we were just speaking about.
Yeah.
Okay. However, before anyone goes running off to the GP, we need to get the papers in order. Okay, you need evidence. So in order to get NHS CHC, you need to prove that you have the needs. Okay, it's all very well just to tell them you have the needs, but you haven't got any evidence of the need, then they'll say you don't have it. Okay, so say for instance you have waking night care needs. Okay, there needs to be evidence in your house, okay, in some kind of log of the times and the interventions that take place at night. Okay, so you know there's some kind of log. If, say for instance, you're at high risk of falls, then there should be a risk assessment in your house saying that you're at high risk of falls. There should, amongst your care plan at home, there should be something. Say for instance, you have regular UTIs. Okay, so that should be recorded somewhere. The treatment from the doctors, the antibiotics and what have you, the fact that you have to look out for those UTIs should be recorded somewhere. If your client has behavioural problems, say for instance your client bites you or scratches or swears or what have you, there should be an absolute record. There should be a behaviour chart somewhere which can be easily accessed. And when we're looking at the domain behaviour, there is actually a domain behaviour. You can easily point to that chart and say, well, it's very difficult to manage his behaviour or her behaviour. You know, sometimes she lashes out. She's hurt people. She's hurt herself. There should be something that documents that need. Okay. Say for instance, a person has needs for 2-to-1 care on transfers. There should be an OT assessment, a moving and handling assessment, which is easily accessible.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually getting the paperwork in order, the CCG can look back 3 months. Okay, so you want 3 months of paperwork that is in order before you approach them, because otherwise you're going to approach them and they're just going to say, well, there's no evidence of the need and therefore you're not eligible. So that's the piece of work that really really needs, the most work really is in getting that paperwork in order before you actually go anywhere near the CCG. And very often I'm instructed by people just to do that, just to get, I take instructions from them at the beginning. We go through the DST, we identify which are the highest scores, where they're most likely to score the highest scores. And then we focus on what evidence is required in order to demonstrate those needs.
Yeah. And sometimes you'd think that that might be more straightforward. It probably would be, I suppose, more straightforward if someone had a personal injury case, because those things are being documented for, you know, regularly for a purpose. But maybe that's more difficult, I guess, for somebody that's maybe not involved in litigation process.
Actually, difficult for both, because even when people are in the process of litigation, you know, although you're looking at that person's care needs all the time, you're not looking at it for NHS CHC, so you're not actually addressing those 12 domains.
So it really does, you know, require applying yourself to those domains, as you say. That's really interesting. As usual, Rachel, we're running out of time madly, so I'm going to hurry on to the last question, if you don't mind. So I just wanted, because I do think it's important to round up on this note, what advice do you have for people who on paper appear to be clear candidates for CHC, but it's being refused? Is there anything that can be done about that?
There is an appeal procedure. So the first stage is a review. That basically means that you go back to the CCG who made the decision and they look at it again. I think it's as high as 90% their decisions are upheld. I mean, it's really low percentage of people who actually succeed at that level of appeal.
Right, okay.
You can then appeal to NHS England. But I would say get legal representation. I'm available to, you know, that is, you know, a big part of my work. So because it's unpacking those domains and knowing what evidence is required and knowing your way around that, is, you know, it's not easy without some history and background knowledge of the, well, A, the procedure, and B, what they look out for and what evidence is required. And, well, you know, otherwise you could just be going round and round in circles.
Yeah. And as you said at the beginning of this, Rachel, it's such an important part of lots of people's lives who find themselves in a position where actually they're looking into the future and thinking, I don't know how I'm going to fund all of this. It's hugely stressful and massively important. And I'm so grateful to you, Rachel, for coming along today and talking to us about this. And because we are doing this on a pre-recorded basis, we can't take any questions, unfortunately. But I will make sure that your email, I've already checked, it's okay with you, Rachel. I'll make sure that your email address is put onto the slide at the end of this talk, and everyone's got my details. So any questions arising, please feel free to get in touch with either Rachel or me, and we'll come back to you. As usual, the time has gone in a flash. So thank you, Rachel. I'm really grateful.
Yes, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.